I think I was on mute to begin with, and I apologize. I was making some explanation as to how we were having a difficulty sharing our PowerPoint slides as we normally would, but it turns out that I might have been on mute the entire time, so I apologize, but I'm super glad that you all have joined us. My name is Caroline Player, and on behalf of the Georgia Tech Alumni Association, I am so pleased to welcome you to the kickoff webinar for 2015 for our Professional Gold Seminars. This seminar, of course, is covering emotional intelligence. As a few housekeeping items, due to the size of our audience, we intend to have all participants on mute. So in case you aren't on mute, to avoid any background noise, just go ahead and click on the mic beside your name and mute yourself during the course of the presentation. At the conclusion of our presentation, we will be taking questions and feedback and all that good stuff, and we're going to ask that you use the chat feature to do that. That's typically up in the upper right-hand corner, so you'll have to pull down that chat window and be sure to send us any messages or questions that you have at the conclusion of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, also use that chat feature. We'll be alerted. If you have any technical difficulties, let us know, and we'll try to remedy that as best as possible. So we are so pleased to be partnering for this series with Georgia Tech alumna Adrienne Johnson, who is leading the course of this Professional Gold Series. She earned her BS in Chemistry from Georgia Tech in 2004 and is the Vice President of Operations at Buckhead Investment Partners. Her passion for forming teams and building careers began here at Georgia Tech when she was part of the founding management team at the Starbucks at Technology Square. Through the growth of a significant network in the technology community, Adrienne had the opportunity to leverage her strengths and build effective teams in delivering solid operational outcomes at VendorMate, a healthcare supply chain optimization company. At VendorMate, Adrienne was promoted 5 times in 6 years, ultimately rising from operations analyst to vice president of operations. So Adrienne has a great passion and record of continuous improvement of people, processes, and technologies, and is excited to bring this experience back to her alma mater. So without further delay, I'm going to turn this program over to Adrienne. Thank you all for participating.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a great start to the day, and for those of you here in Atlanta that you've avoided any bad weather and traffic, we're going to go ahead and get started. And on the agenda today, as it relates to emotional intelligence, we are going to be talking about how we define emotional intelligence, why it matters so much in developing and optimizing our careers, and then how to go about developing it. Just to kind of give you a little bit of context, the session will take approximately 45 to 50 minutes for us to get through the content, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. As Caroline mentioned, we'll do some chatting at the end since our technology is being a little challenged this morning. We will also be recording this session so that for those of you who may have to leave a few minutes early to get back to work or anything of the sort, you can go back and listen to the recording. It'll be available off the Professional Gold page of gtalumni.org within a couple of days. And the back end of it is pretty heavily loaded on execution, what we do to take this information from this hour and apply it practically to our careers and our growth and development. So you will want to make sure if you do have to leave early that you circle back and finish that up so that you can really implement some of the things that we have talked about for the purposes of this particular session. So let's dive into defining emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is defined as the ability to perceive, understand, and harness the emotions of yourself and the emotions of others to achieve desired outcomes. While a pretty complex definition, it is pretty simple when we break it out in its unique parts. So let's think about it as a matrix. You've got the ability to first perceive your own emotions. So for instance, on Saturday afternoon, I was just kind of in a little bit of a funk, to be quite honest. I didn't want to do anything, and I was just sitting there thinking, why on earth do I feel this way? And I just realized in a way that I would not have been able to 10 years ago, I understood that I just felt like I hadn't had any Adrian time lately, any good quality, going shopping, going to get a pedicure, doing something fun and nice just for me without friends, without family, without worrying about work. And I said, you know what, on Sunday, I need to go and do that. And so I was able to harness and understand that emotion and then put in plan a place that helped me get back to a good spot. And I have to say that on Monday morning, I felt amazing after my little shopping expedition. It was a couple of hours. It wasn't anything significant, but I felt like I'd had time to do something that I wanted to do, and I got to relax. And that really helped me, and it got me back on Monday so that when I went back to work, I felt energized, productive, and able to move forward, and I found my mood to be much better ever since then. And so when you think about that, all those little things that can, lead us instead of just kind of wallowing in our emotions, whether they be positive or negative, to actually take action and figure out what that next step needs to be in order to maximize our productivity and maximize outcomes. And that can come in really, really big ways or little tiny packages, kind of like my little weekend adventure. Now, for those of you in informal or formal leadership roles in your organizations or who strive to be in those types of roles, it's also really important that you're able to perceive the emotions of others, so to recognize when someone is frustrated, confused, excited about a potential change. You're able to understand where that emotion is rooted. So as an example, if you're sitting in a staff meeting and one of your colleagues is looking frustrated, maybe about a process change or something along those lines, you can understand why they might be feeling that way. Maybe this particular change means more work for them, or they are failing to understand it and or are confused by it. Once you understand that, you can then harness that emotion in many ways to sit down and have that conversation, to take that action, to help that individual understand what, one, they need to recognize that they are themselves frustrated. They need to understand why that is, and then you can kind of help them get into a place where they're willing to take some action that will ultimately improve the outcomes for the business, which ultimately impacts not only your outcomes as an individual of the team, but the whole enterprise. So when we talk about success, a lot of times we think about it in the context of IQ. I find this to be particularly true at an institution with the smarts of Georgia Tech. We tend to hang our hats on our intelligence quite a bit. So I want to ask you guys really quickly to think about this. What percentage of your success in life can be attributed to your IQ? And think about that. Is it 10%, 20%, 50%, or 90%? Since our chat function isn't quite as robust as it typically is, I will go ahead and give you guys the answer. Most people will usually go somewhere along the lines of 50 to 90%, but it's actually only 10% of your actual success in life is attributed to your IQ. And Daniel Goleman, who is the father of emotional intelligence, as he's been coined, after decades of research on the subject and having coined the phrase himself in one of his early works, actually said that our IQ is really a baseline, and after about an IQ of 115, the biggest driver to one's success is their emotional intelligence. So again, their ability to be a leader, their ability to get beyond just the basic intellectual knowledge, facts, figures, and thought processes, and really understand people to understand themselves and to continue to drive themselves forward. So let's jump into why this is so incredibly important in our career. And to start there, we really have to stop and understand some of the science of these emotions so that we can all get really comfortable with the fact that not only are they normal, but are actually a huge benefit to us and to our ability to thrive as a species. But we need to understand kind of the history of some of those emotions, how to drive them forward, triggers that we have in today's world, and how to overcome those. So whenever your brain is exposed to some type of external stimuli, it actually funnels through two unique pathways in your brain. The first of which is it goes to the amygdala, which is this very ancient part of your brain that controls the fight, flight, or freeze aspects. It enables you to react very quickly. The second is your prefrontal cortex, which is the executive center of your brain. So it's the part of your brain that's responsible for complex thoughts, logic. And what happens is when that stimuli goes through your eyes, into your pathways, and into your brain, your amygdala actually makes a judgment call within roughly a quarter of a second, which is 8 times faster than your prefrontal cortex, which takes about 2 seconds to actually process all the information around you. But your amygdala comes back with a really quick, is that slamming door something that actually poses risk to me? And what your amygdala does is it gives you that fight, flight, or freeze response. And again, very, very quickly. What it also does is it immediately triggers the release of adrenaline. And we all know that when that happens, your heart starts to race, you start to breathe a lot more shallowly. And a lot of times, even after, you've had that door slam or someone has startled you, you have that jumpy feeling. It takes a while for that feeling to go away. That adrenaline is now in your bloodstream. And unfortunately, what it does in a situation that's a false negative, if you will, is it creates this situation where you are distracted, irritable, and kind of jumpy. And that can be really, really challenging for an individual. So imagine a situation where your boss is giving you feedback and you have that kind of jumpy reaction. You're distracted. You're not listening to everything your boss has to say. And so in that particular situation, you're not able to grow. You're not able to leverage the strength of your prefrontal cortex because you're so distracted, and you're unable to really take all that feedback in, understand it, appreciate it. And unfortunately, a lot of that will fall by the wayside. So why is it when your boss has that particular, gives you that feedback, why do we react that way? Why does it feel like such a physical response to something that isn't really threatening at all? And the reality is that as we're growing up, we really shape our identities based on things like who our family is, where we grew up, what our favorite sports teams are, whether we think that we're intelligent, whether we think we're nice, friendly, funny, all of these things that people tell us that we are, that we perceive that we are, we associate with us, and we perceive them to be part of our physical sense of self. We kind of envelop the whole thing in the context of ourselves and say, well, I am all of those things. And so whenever someone, if you will, threatens even part of our identity, so your boss says, hey, I know you think you're very professional, but I actually think that, you really have some opportunities for development here, here, and here, we react physically as if we are being threatened, which, again, sends off that fight, flight, or freeze, and that amygdala response that releases all that adrenaline that's very distracting. And so we have this reaction to something that isn't physical at all, but even not that long ago, a century ago, pre-industrialization and all that would have been very, very helpful to us in trying to gather food and hunting, gathering, and even all of the lack of safety protocol that existed then. You had to be more aware as you were crossing the street and things of that nature. But the reality of today is that we live in a pretty safe world. We have a little ice on the roads here in Atlanta this morning, and everybody decided we're going to delay start times for schools, take the proper precautions. Again, we're not out hunting and gathering for food. You go to the grocery store and you get what you need. And so all of those things that our body for tens of thousands of years has had and have allowed us to evolve in the way that we have certainly suited us, but as the world around us changes, our body is still equipped largely to the world that we used to live in.
I totally agree.
And not us specifically, but our ancestors and our former relatives of generations past. So it's really important that we kind of keep that in mind as we're having these interactions and we're finding ourselves reacting in this way. Our baseline is completely different than it was a couple of hundred years ago even. And so when your boss is giving you feedback or someone at work is short with you and it feels like they're yelling at you and you have that little spike of adrenaline, to really kind of keep in mind that your reaction is, one, completely normal and biologically sound. There's nothing wrong with you that you would react that way. But what's really going to differentiate you and those around you, again, is not likely to be your IQ at all. It's likely to be the way that you react to that. And so if you are able to recognize that, fluttering heart rate, the quick, short breaths, and the distractedness and say, okay, there's nothing for me to be worked up about or frustrated about right now, and you take a deep breath, and you really reflect on what it is that's going on, you can almost override, if you will, that amygdala with your prefrontal cortex and say, logically, there is nothing for me to be upset about right now. This person isn't yelling at me. I'm not in harm's way. And you can react accordingly. And once you're able to get past that physical response and get over your emotions and leverage that executive thought center, they call that getting to clear, by the way, this ability to relax and be logical. You're able then to focus on what it is that you need to do. How do you harness those emotions? You now have all this angst and, kind of built up tension perhaps about, this colleague having just lost their temper with you, but now you can choose to say, hey, colleague, I don't appreciate you talking to me in that way. I understand that you may be in a bad mood or having a bad day. Let's talk about this now or later. But you can choose how you want to react. And you can channel that emotion into something that's more constructive, like having an open dialogue with your colleague, again, that hopefully coaches them to better behavior, ultimately not only establishing you as a formal or informal leader, but also helping to improve the function of your team and your entire enterprise. And that's how people get noticed. That's how people rise in their careers. It's those people who are adding value to the organization on a holistic level, beyond just the scope of their existing roles and responsibilities. And those people with leadership attributes can do so much more than an individual team player as a function of being able to rally teams and getting everyone on the same page. So again, it's all about how you leverage that. And studies have shown that high performers are 10 times more likely to have a high emotional intelligence score than average performers. And so think about that. If you can improve that emotional intelligence, does it ultimately impact your ability to be classified as a high performer? And studies indicate that it absolutely does. So we really need to now jump into, the meat of this presentation, which is, okay, emotional intelligence is important, I get it. How do I go about actually improving it? And to do that, we really need to go back and look at our emotional intelligence matrix. And again, just break it out into discrete parts. You have your ability to perceive your own emotions. If you aren't already there, that's definitely your starting place. Before you would worry about understanding where those emotions are coming from or harnessing them. You have emotions all day long. Right now, I'm excited to be talking to you guys. This morning when I woke up, I was, kind of not excited about the cold and what was the weather going to be like, a little anxious. All day long, in addition to your stream of consciousness, your actual thoughts, you have simultaneously a series of emotions. And when you understand what those are and why they're there, you can be really powerful in enabling you to harness those. Once you understand your own, it's so much easier to have context to perceive and understand other people's emotions. But until you really truly know yourself, it's hard to understand other people or even to have a framework for that. So you need to make sure that you start with yourself. So to do that, I always recommend that you start, with just introspection. On Saturday afternoon when I wasn't feeling well, I just stopped and asked myself, why do you feel this way? Really think about it. Are you frustrated with somebody else, with yourself, with your circumstances, and is there anything that you can do to change that? For a lot of people, just thinking about it isn't always helpful. A lot of people prefer to journal or to take notes and logs. They have all kinds of really interesting mood apps now, too, where you can kind of log how you're feeling on a certain day and then see, how that changes over time. I used to, for a while, every Sunday night, in spite of the fact, by the way, I've always loved my jobs. On Sunday nights, I would get this anxiety about what was the week going to bring and how early I was going to have to get up and how busy it was going to be. That since recognizing it, I just don't get that anymore because I know what it's coming from, and it's all of these things that may or may not end up being. And so by recognizing it and understanding it, I was able to just let it go. And for some people, journaling about those kinds of things can be really helpful. For those of you who are talkers, as am I, just talking to your best friend about those kinds of things, somebody that you can trust, maybe it's a mentor, maybe it's someone that you're interacting with on a regular basis, and just make sure it's someone who is positive and solution-oriented. If not, a lot of times, when you're talking about those emotions, it can become a spiral, and almost lead people to kind of wallow in their angst or emotions that may not actually be the most productive thing to do. But have a person that you can trust and talk to and engage with, who's going to listen to you, who's going to make you feel heard, and hopefully will have more of a solution focus to how do you take it now to the next step once you've uncovered and understand where those emotions are coming from. Now, another excellent tool to have in your toolkit is meditation. And studies a couple of years ago showed that within 8 weeks of practicing mindful meditation, which for those of you who aren't familiar with it is the meditation where you focus on your breathing for 20 or 30 minutes. And what you're doing is you're training your brain to stay focused on one thing. Actually strengthens your prefrontal cortex, which is that area that is responsible for the executive thought processes. And by strengthening it and over having that sense of what you need to be doing, you're almost training your brain to automatically react. So when your amygdala lets off all those emotions and that anxiety or stress and that adrenaline, your prefrontal cortex can take over much more quickly with that logical thought process. And that gets you back to clear, which is that area where you kind of have let go of all that tension and are really thinking with your prefrontal cortex, that executive thought center again. So for those of you who are interested, I know it can feel a little touchy-feely, but science has actually shown that meditation can really improve one's emotional intelligence. So it's certainly something to consider for those of you who are open to it. Now, after you have really mastered self-awareness and understanding your own feelings, and are starting to work into understanding and perceiving others, body language can be a great place to start. And typically, we would do these as more of a poll, but since our technology is less than cooperative this morning, what we will do is just kind of talk through these quickly. So as you look at this gentleman on the screen, how do you think he's feeling? Do you think he's angry? Do you think he's happy? Do you think he's curious, sad, frustrated? And as I look at him, I notice a couple of things right off the bat. One, I notice that his eyebrows are raised, almost like he's inquiring. He's not quite smiling, but he's also not frowning. And there's a little bit of tension in his mouth. Excuse me. And then his hands are kind of upwards and open, again, leading me to believe that he's kind of in an open posture combined with his raised eyebrows. At least I believe like he's almost just asked a question or something and is waiting for someone else's response. He seems very open, curious, interested. And we're about to, I will go ahead and preface this by telling you, we're about to get into the fabulous 80s pictures from actually one of my all-time favorite books on body language, which is Body Language 101. But all of these images have looked like they were taken like 1987. So bear with me on that, but they really are great examples. Now this woman here sitting in the chair, do we think she's excited? Is she anticipating something? Is she frustrated? Feeling tired? As I look at her really straight posture, the closed off nature of she's got her legs crossed, her arms crossed, I suppose she could be very cold. But people who are cold don't typically wear that really like straight line on their face or those eyebrows that look almost furrowed. I'm guessing that she is frustrated. She's not agreeing with something going on in the room. She's definitely in dissent. And that closed off body language and facial expression really denote that. Okay, this one's my favorite. Is this gentleman here. You know, when you look at him, initially you would think, he's happy, right? Like he's got his smile. But when you look at another picture of him smiling, what you really start to recognize is that he looks completely different. When he's got his genuine smile on, he's actually showing his teeth. His mouth is more pulled back, which then causes his cheeks to raise, his eyebrows to raise, his eyes are more open. You can really get a sense in this one that, you know, when you compare the two, the picture on the left is more of one of those, yeah, I'm smiling, but I'm really not all that thrilled about whatever is going on. Maybe it's your Monday morning, yeah, I'm excited to be here face. But, you know, the picture on the right is really that true demonstration of his enthusiasm and happiness. And it's important to realize, you know, as we look at these kinds of things, everybody's different. You know, there are people who don't smile and show their teeth because they're self-conscious about their teeth. There are people who are just more reserved and hold their emotions closer to the vest, so they may never give you a big jovial smile, and you may never see them be frustrated. It doesn't mean those things aren't there. But as you start to observe people over time, you can become familiar with their customs and the little nuances of their body language. So for instance, my boss, even though she'll sit in meetings with her arms, kind of tight and closed around her, I know it's because she's cold. She's always cold. And so I don't read anything into that. But I can tell that when her voice elevates and she's, getting frustrated, I can also sense that. And actually, her voice doesn't tend to elevate at all. It actually tends to get more quiet when she's frustrated and reflecting. So, notice those subtleties, not only about your boss, but those colleagues that you're spending so much of your time, effort, and day with, so that you can help not only channel their emotions more positively, but again, that ultimately improves the entire value of the enterprise and what your entire team accomplishes and establishes you as a leader and an expert within that group. So when it comes to recognizing other people's emotions and communicating with them and helping them harness and channel that energy productively, what I find is a lot of times we tend to assume that we know what someone else is thinking, and we assume that other people know what we're thinking. And at a baseline, we have to realize that we are all individuals, and we are certainly not mind readers. So, take the time to get to know your colleagues, your peers, your boss. If it's appropriate in your environment, you can consider going out for coffee. I always find getting out of the office leads to less formal interactions, which can be very positive, again, depending on your office environment. You can go out for coffee, and, you can tell the person just what you're perceiving. I perceive that you're frustrated with me when you raise your voice at me. And I'd like to understand if that's what you mean. And you reach this point of mutual understanding, because you ask them, is this really what you mean by that? And I can tell you, we have all this anxiety going in any of these kinds of meetings or discussions with individuals that it's going to be really confrontational. And it's probably 1 in 50 times where it's truly confrontational and does not end well. And so the likelihood of that is not only based on the person, but it's also just very rare. Ultimately, most of the people in this world are good people who are open and communicative and who want to be better and want to have relationships. They just may not always, their execution may not always be perfect, as many of ours aren't. And so having that open conversation about what you're thinking, feeling, can really help you understand that about other people and reach a point that is very effective for both of you in collaborating. And again, ultimately, the goal is to improve your work output, improve your colleagues' work output, the production of the entire team, and that ultimately elevates you in the organization. So again, what you're doing is you're creating that respect for you, that you're willing to have those open dialogues, you're creating that mutual understanding, and you're creating an open communication channel. And once you've overcome that first big hurdle, what you do is you get the opportunity to establish that relationship and then to continue to have those dialogues. And what you'll find is people will start to come to you when they have challenges, problems, need help, or your insight and understanding, and that is the ultimate hallmark of a leader. And again, that's informally or formally. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that people are looking up to you and people need your help and guidance. And ultimately what you're doing then is improving those outcomes of the organization. So my single favorite part of this entire section is to go through and determine what action steps are. What are the things that you want to do to make this count? And studies have shown that by actually setting real, true objectives in these types of sessions, you're actually far more likely to take some meaningful action, and that actually improves outcomes and performance as the result of them as much as 60%. So it's really important that we do that. And studies have also shown that if you don't do anything with new knowledge and new insight within 3 weeks of a session, I mean, it just completely falls by the wayside and nothing happens until you have some other event, some other session or series that kind of re-elevates that in your mind. So take this opportunity for those of you who have already invested the time to think about, and whether it's just committing to the rest of us or even if it's, writing it down in your journal or putting it on your calendar to follow up in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, what is that one action item that you can take in order to make use of some of the information in this particular presentation? So really stopping to reflect on it. And again, you can open your chat window in the top right-hand corner of the screen. You can push down and then there's a chat box. And you can type either to everyone or you can type just to Caroline and tell us what's one thing you want to improve based on this webinar. And then we will anonymously share that with the group so that we can all kind of learn and engage from each other in this process. So again, in that chat window, you'll just want to write, one action item that you want to take based on this particular session. Excellent. Okay, we have a couple that are starting to come in. Someone says, gaining info from the CEO who does not share what he or she is really thinking. And that, by the way, is kind of one of those things you always have to be careful about in a leadership position. Sometimes what you're always thinking is not the most appropriate, motivating, or inspiring thing to be sharing. And so I find, that those in highest leadership positions in an organization will tend to hold their emotions a little bit closer to the vest. Someone else says, reread the book on emotional intelligence and Body Language 101. Fantastic, again, I love both of those. And what you'll find as you start to dig into those emotional intelligence books is really, we've simplified the definition of emotional intelligence for the purposes of fitting into a 1 hour-long presentation. And emotional intelligence can really be stratified into something like 25 or 30 different categories like emotional control and positivity. And so really, you can really dive deep on it. But the most important thing is just that you're really aware and cognizant of what you're thinking, feeling, and then able to leverage that to the most of your ability. Someone says, make my coffee breaks strategic. I like that. While we're breaking anyway, at least you can make more use and benefit of it. It's certainly always a great opportunity to get to spend some time with your colleagues and understand what's going on. Someone else says, my goal is to establish a way to judge relative EQ and measure ongoing performance. Hopefully this is understandable. Unfortunately, I'm not quite understanding that. Establish a way to judge relative EQ, measure ongoing performance. There are certainly emotional intelligence measures out there, so there are reliable and validated tests that you could use if you're looking to use this. Potentially, it sounds like for your team and to help them grow and develop. So you could look at using some of those, and then on some periodic basis, you probably wouldn't want to do it too frequently because it does take time for those to adjust as you're doing coaching and everything, but you could certainly implement something like that, potentially annually. Someone else says, pay close attention to facial expressions and body language during meetings. Make notes of others' true feelings rather than simply what they say. That's an excellent point, and I will say our director of operations back when I was at VendorMe was particularly keen at noticing other people's expressions and reactions during staff meetings. And so she could tell when people, and it's difficult to do this when you are actually running the meeting because you've got this whole agenda that you're trying to get through. But she would just kind of watch everyone else, and she would see when someone had gotten confused or lost, and she would stop and say, I want to make sure everybody's on the right page. And it would be because she was keenly aware of what her colleagues in that room were thinking, and she was watching their body language. You could tell when someone was confused. So that's a great opportunity, to understand what other people are thinking and feeling. And the reality is, if you're in a staff meeting and something happens that people aren't happy about, again, I always come back to the example of a process change because I find that they tend to cause the most upset because we're naturally averse to change as people. That individuals can, really be disruptive to that kind of change if they don't have an opportunity to be heard, and then they leave that meeting and they get everyone else's feathers in a ruffle over, not liking it or whatever, when other people may have been just fine. So understanding where those challenges lie can be really important. Someone else says, handling confrontational situations. again, so much of that, it feels more confrontational to us because we're thinking about all the possible terrible outcomes, but I've very rarely been in a situation with someone that I perceived to be confrontational going in where I didn't walk away feeling really good about having had that conversation, because at the end of the day, 99% of us want to do the right thing by other people, and we have the best of intentions. Our execution just isn't always perfect. Someone else says, I'm an introvert, and I find myself oversensitive and pretty shy. How to overcome shyness when you're connecting with others? I don't know that shyness is a bad thing. You know, I certainly consider myself an introvert, surprisingly enough, as much as I talk. But what I find is that I have fewer meaningful connections, so I don't have, you know, a group of 20 friends. You know, I have my 4 or 5 that I talk to every week and that really truly know who I am, so try starting there. You know, have that little group of people that you feel really comfortable with, that you can trust, and just know that it may take you more time, which is actually quite appropriate, to form connections with other people. Because a lot of people will meet new people and tell them their whole life story, and that may not be appropriate. You don't know if you can trust this person. You don't have an ongoing history, so I don't think shyness is necessarily a bad thing. It obviously depends on your line of work. If you're shy and in a sales role, that can really be challenging. But for those of you who, you know, are in more independent contributor roles or even leadership roles, there was actually some research that came out that said that introverts made better leaders as a result of them being better listeners. So shyness isn't necessarily a bad thing. I always just try to remember when going into those situations that, you know, very few people are truly like comfortable and thrive when meeting new people. And so to just be genuine. And one of my colleagues said that he goes into every networking session and he just thinks if there's one person there that he can connect with and have a genuine conversation with, it is worth his time. So for him, it's not about collecting 20 business cards of people he's never going to speak to again because, you know, he didn't have a meaningful conversation. He connected with just one person. So I thought that was really powerful too. Someone else is they're striving to be more likable and approachable. And that's definitely a great thing to do. Again, that open body language can really be helpful. Consistency is another thing that a lot of leaders will say is one of their great attributes, and that's people know how you're going to react to something. I laughed a few years ago when my colleagues told me that when something would happen, I would put my head in my hands and I would shake my head. And it made them feel like something was really wrong because it felt inconsistent to them. It felt like it was bad news. So they didn't want to come tell me things. And so I had to learn that you can't do that and you just kind of stay neutral and strive to understand and come up with a solution that makes people ultimately more comfortable. Another thing that can be, we were laughing about this in my office recently, those of us when we're working independently and staring at our computer screen, we sometimes have the resting unapproachable face, which isn't actually what we call it at the office, but I'll spare you all that very nice language. But, you know, we have that kind of resting face that doesn't always seem very approachable. And so to realize that when someone, you know, is engrossed in work, you don't have to approach them, but if you need to, it's probably just they're engrossed in whatever they're doing. It's not that they're in a bad mood. So keep that in mind as well. Someone says, not displaying the raw emotion too visually to my coworkers, working on my poker face. That's a good one, and I always, you know, for an introvert, I do have a tendency to wear my heart on my sleeve. Again, it's something I've been working on for, you know, the impact that it has on everyone around me and even myself. You know, when you allow yourself to, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this, but there's a book, it's called Drop in the Bucket, and the Gallup organization had worked on it. But it was a series of research that effectively said, there's this magic ratio of positive and negative interactions. And it's approximately 5 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction. So if you stray from that, so you start to get too many negative interactions, you have this downward spiral effect, and it just kind of keeps going. And so people start to get negative, and they get down, and they're frustrated. On the flip side, if you have, you know, 13 positive interactions, your boss tells you you're amazing 13 times for every 1 time that your boss says you have some things you need to work on, what ends up happening is you completely lose all grounding and you become overconfident, unrealistic, overly positive, thinking everything's great when in reality it may not be. And so that magic ratio of, you know, 5 to 1 is really important. And you think about that, even the impact that it has to yourself every time you allow yourself to be negative. It creates that spiral down for you, and you don't want that because that certainly impacts the people around you. So working on that neutrality and that genuine neutrality, it'll take time, but it can certainly yield excellent results for you in a leadership position, being liked among your colleagues, being approachable, having people want to come talk to you, and being able to establish yourself as a leader in the organization. Someone else says that they want to work on being more perceptive of other people's emotions and be able to channel those to benefit both themselves and the organization. Again, that's really important. Great time to see that in staff meetings, and then even when people tell you things independently. And I do like to acknowledge other people's emotions. They're perfectly valid. And again, when we kind of go through all that science, there's nothing wrong with us having them. It's understanding that we can't let ourselves wallow in them. And they're great triggers for us to say, okay, what do I need to do next? But what they can't be is, a place for us to stall out and not take action, which ultimately leads to fewer and less exciting results for the organization and for ourselves. Someone else says, if you're leading a meeting and I see one person out of the 10 look displeased with what was said, how can that be handled with the goal of pacifying the displeased person while still holding the positive attention of the other 9? It's completely going to depend on the situation. And I was doing training probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I would go to hospitals across the country and do that training. And I would laugh because there was one person in every room, and it didn't matter if you had 5 people or you had 100 people. There was always at least one person that was the naysayer of the bunch, which, by the way, is quite an asset. For those of you who have that person on your team who finds the wrong in everything and why things can't happen, figure out how to channel that person's ability to see potential pitfalls into a positive for the organization. Because ultimately that person can realize things that you need to overcome. And so what I've started doing is finding out who those people were in advance and meeting with them and getting their buy-in and saying, okay, what are your challenges? Where do you think that this could go wrong? And this can be internally as well. And you actually spend time talking to them about things before you do anybody else. One, it brings that person into the inside crew, right? They know what's going on, they're in the know, they feel empowered, they feel like a leader in the organization. 2, it gives you the opportunity to identify things that you've got to work through that you may not have seen. It may have been one of your blind spots. And then when you get into the meeting with, the larger group of people, hopefully you've now got the buy-in of this individual because you've helped them work through all of the potential pitfalls, and then they're going to be on your side in the meeting. So, ideally what you want to do is identify who that person is and get in front of it. As I look around all the different organizations and teams I've been a part of in my career, I can go back and tell you exactly who that one person typically was or is. And so it's a great opportunity to identify that person. I would tell you that if you see that one person, again, depending on the situation, the timing, if it's a big issue versus a small issue, sometimes you can address it in the meeting, but typically what I would do is try and catch that person right after the meeting before they could get to anybody else. Say, hey, I see that you were frustrated. Is there something that I missed? What can I do? How do we move forward? And sometimes what you'll realize when you talk to that person, they may not even be displeased with whatever was going on in the meeting. They just had a fight with their significant other, or they realize their kid's sick and they're going to have to leave work early and they're trying to figure out how all that's going to work. It can be any number of things that could be going on. But at least when you open that dialogue, you as the leader in the meeting, or even an informal leader in the meeting, can understand what those potential pitfalls are and open that channel of communication in order to make sure you feel confident you've got everybody on board. Someone says, seems a poker face is not genuine and people would sense not lead to positive future interactions. That's true. And by the way, every time we talk about these things, and in a couple months we'll get to communication styles and how to communicate effectively with others. Someone always brings up this point of, you have to be genuine, and that's absolutely true. And what I'm never saying is, hide your emotions for the sake of all else. What I'm saying is recognize they are just that, emotions, they are not logic. And figure out how you use them to, you harness them positively, right? So it's okay to be frustrated. You may not want to share that because it doesn't necessarily have great impact to other people, but what I find is you start to get that emotional control. Those emotions are a lot less traumatic than, for me, than they were, say, 10 years ago. Frustration today is not what frustration was 10 years ago because I've learned how to control that in many ways. So again, always work that balance. You don't want to just, and again, this is, for me, has been a process of years, and I continue to work on it even now. It's a slow evolution. If you just are, a highly emotional person and you walk into work tomorrow and you're just like, Mr. or Mrs. Poker Face, people are going to be like, well, what's wrong with you? What is this new act? Or they're definitely going to sense that. But, gradually over time, as you just start to recognize it and make slow little changes over time, it can be really powerful. Someone else says, a positive attitude and consideration for others' feelings ultimately is what makes up emotional intelligence. And we have to build in the 5-second delay and poker face in responding to things others say, because their comments are often made specifically to elicit a response from us. They certainly do elicit a response. I'm not sure that people always think about it in that context, but it can certainly be the case. And again, that 5-second delay, that waiting for your prefrontal cortex to catch up with your amygdala and really evaluate things can give you, enough time, again, to process everything that's going on and to make a neutral, meaningful decision that has positive impact on your colleagues and others. Someone else says, peers and employees could potentially perceive you as a weak leader when you open yourself too much for or ask for too much validation. What are your thoughts on this? I agree. I mean, again, everything is a balance. You don't want to be completely autocratic, because what you don't want is for people to think that their opinions don't matter. And the reality is, we all know teams accomplish far more than any individual ever will. On the flip side, you don't want to seem like, everybody gets a vote and everything. And people who dissent, if you engage them early. And again, your dissenters usually have great value because they see a lot of things and a lot of pitfalls from the front lines that other people may not. That does give you the opportunity to say, hey, I'm collaborating here. It makes them feel empowered. It brings them in to a leadership role and can be really hugely powerful. But at the end of the day, if you make some decision and you believe that it's the right one, and you should try to be as collaborative as possible, sometimes you're going to have to backpedal. You're going to have to change your perspective and approach. So I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about people thinking that you're trying to get validation, that you're seeking their validation as much as their buy-in and their insight and their knowledge. And it's, if you said to your colleagues, do you think I did the right thing? Yeah, that might be asking for validation. But if you say, I think this is the process as I see it, am I missing anything? Is there anything else that we need to be considering? I'd really love your insight. You're completely buying them in to the process and to you, and you being open to feedback and additional opportunities in their insight. You're really elevating them. I don't think that you're in any way making yourself seem weak. But again, it's all situational. And lastly, someone says, focus on being consistent with your colleagues. That's a really good point, and it is, again, something that I have worked on quite diligently in my career, as it can be difficult, all the million things and pieces were getting pulled in a million different directions. It can be very easy for frustration or excitement or any of those things to swing to extreme. And again, it makes people feel like they can't approach you because they don't know how you're going to react. They don't know what you're going to say. And ultimately, people want to be able to predict that they know what it is. And you don't ever want to cut yourself off from your colleagues' feedback or insight. Because at the end of the day, we are all looking at things through a slightly different lens. And we all certainly have value to add. Well, if anyone else doesn't have any questions, thank you all very much for joining us today. We appreciate it. Next month in February, we'll be talking about accountability and how to make sure we leverage this emotional intelligence and continue to move forward. So if no one else has anything, I'll tell you all to have a great day, to please be careful if you're out in this bad weather, though it seems to have cleared up quite a bit now. So have a wonderful rest of February, and I'm sorry, in March, because it's already March. We'll be discussing accountability. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.